Yo, what is up? It is your boy Zether, back at it again with a brand new video. Now, as you guys can see from the title, this is going to be What If Deku Went to Shiketsu High? And if you guys are as excited about this series as I am, we're gonna have a blast to say the least. So with that being said, I don't really want to bore you guys or give you guys too much jibber jabber, so let's get started. Alright, so we essentially start our story off when Deku's about 4 years old. Now, in this version of events, a couple of things are going to be changing, since in the original timeline, everything's pretty much going to stay the same up until this point. See, this is when the day that Bakugo gets his quirk, and Bakugo would say, "Whoa, I have an explosion quirk!" And this is when Deku would proceed to look towards Bakugo as he would say, "That's so awesome, Kachan. I wish I was just like you." As this is when Deku's hair would proceed to change into the color of Bakugo's, as everybody in the class would say, "Whoa, Midoriya, your hair just changed color." As they would say, "Are you a Super Saiyan?" As this is when Deku would say, "What? What?" As everybody in the class would just start laughing, and everybody would just be like, "Nah, we're just kidding." But this is when Deku would proceed to basically be like, "Whoa, my hair changed color. Look, Kachan, we're the same." As Bakugo would say, "But you don't have the same awesome quirk as me, Deku." As Deku would proceed to look towards him and say, "Yeah, but it's still cool too." As Bakugo would say, "I wonder what your quirk is. Can you copy the way people look or something?" As Deku would say, "What if it is? That'll be so awesome. I could look like All Might." As Bakugo would just stop and be like, "He could?" As this is when Inko would proceed to get called at school, as she'd be told about Deku turning into Bakugo's hair, and Deku would proceed to be taken to the quirk doctor's office, as they would proceed to tell Deku all about what his quirk is going to be. As this is when Deku would proceed to be so excited, as the doctor would actually tell Deku that his quirk is actually going to be called white blood cell manipulation, or for simple, shape-shifting. What it really does is changes his white blood cells and changes his appearance, his physical appearance, which means that he's going to have the ability to pretty much change into different things. Not exactly having the ability to change into animals or objects, seeing that the extent of his power actually goes to pretty much human body parts. As let's say someone like Shoji, Deku could probably do the same thing as Shoji, except he's not deformed. He can go in and out of that state as he pleases, and he can actually decide how ripped and how not ripped his body is at the same time. So this is when Deku would just be asked by the quirk doctor to pretty much turn into him, as Deku would want to, but he wouldn't quite be able to. Turns out that for now, Deku can only turn into things that he really, truly wants to turn into. As the quirk doctor would understand what's going on, and he would proceed to tell Inko that she needs to raise this boy right, as with the proper training, he could become one of the best heroes, top 10 even. As Inko would smile, thinking that Izuku's finally going to get to realize his dream of becoming a pro hero. And this is when Deku would proceed to look towards Inko, as he would say, "Mom, I can become a pro hero. It's gonna be amazing." As this is when he would hold up his All Might twin and say, "I'm gonna be the #1." As this is when he would return back to school and Bakugo would ask him what his quirk is. As Deku would say that they said it was something about white blood cells, but it's just shape-shifting. As Bakugo would say, "That's awesome." As he would say, "So Deku, you want to train our quirks together after school?" As this would mark the beginning of a great friendship in the story, with Bakugo and Deku actually starting a great friendship at the beginning of the story. And since they're going to have a friendship and train together, they're going to become their own right-hand man, as they're basically always going to be by each other's sides, and Deku's actually going to end up hanging out with Bakugo and his goons. He's going to have a lot more confidence and a lot more of a cool and calm and collected nature than, his original counterpart, which was very intelligent and very analytical, which Deku will still actually have those aspects to him, except he's going to have, a little more confidence and basically be more like our current manga Deku, where he's a bit more of a cool guy, I guess you could say, or a badass. Now, this is when we're now actually going to keep going, as we're just going to go ahead and have a time skip throughout the years, as Bakugo and Deku would have grown up being a sort of dynamic duo. Bakugo's whole entire aura and his personality would have changed from the original canon, seeing that he actually has somebody to rival him. During the years, Bakugo and Deku would have definitely rivaled each other very much, as it would basically always be a 50-50, where Deku would win some and Bakugo would win some, and there would never really be a true winner. It would kind of be a thing where Deku would get stronger and Bakugo would train to surpass him, and they would just keep going back and forth. as this is essentially how their friendship would have pretty much matured over the years, as Bakugo and Deku's personalities would have changed a lot during the years. See, Deku would have been exactly like I had already said, pretty much the same, just more, calm, collected, and pretty much confident. He would have a lot more of a cool nature, and Bakugo's personality would essentially still be a knucklehead, or not a knucklehead, but he would still be rowdy and still yell like, hey, he would still do that stuff, but he would be more calm, and he would not exactly be that much of a bad guy, I guess you could say. Not exactly mean or a bully, since Deku was there to pretty much tell Bakugo that he shouldn't do that if he wants to become a hero. As this version of Bakugo would have actually listened to him, seeing that this version of Deku's, someone who could definitely, influence Bakugo, seeing that he's kind of his best friend. So during the years, Bakugo and Deku would have ended up having a great relationship with each other and each other's families. As some days, they would pretty much stay over at each other's houses, train, play video games, and they would pretty much grow up having girlfriends together. As this is when they would have their last day of middle school. As this is when Deku and Bakugo would look towards each other as they would say, wow, I guess we're one step closer to, pretty much getting out of here and becoming some pro heroes for ourselves. As Bakugo would say, yeah, and I'm going to go to UA and do just that. As this is when Deku would say, what? You're going to go to UA too? As Bakugo would say, yeah, I mean, come on, wasn't it obvious? As Deku would say, oh, yeah. As this is when Bakugo and Deku would look towards each other and say, so, we've kind of been together all our lives. Don't you want to see who can become stronger at the end of all of this? As Bakugo would look towards Deku and say, huh, that's true. As the two goons who hang out with Bakugo would then say, yeah, you and, Midori have always been going back and forth, and we've never really seen a pure winner. As they would say, why don't you guys actually go to different schools and basically improve on your own and see who becomes stronger after that? As this is when Deku and Bakugo would look towards each other as they would say, what? Go to different schools? We've never really been apart like that. As the goons would proceed to look at Deku and Bakugo and say, I mean, there's always a first time for everything, right? As this is when Deku and Bakugo would look towards each other and say, huh, I guess so. As Bakugo would say, but I'm going to UA. As Deku would say, no way, I'm going there. As this is when Bakugo would say, how about this? We play paper, rock, scissors, and whoever wins goes to UA. As Deku would say, alright, I'm in. As he would basically be smiling, thinking that, yeah, he's definitely going to win. As he would be thinking that, maybe he's going to have to cheat a little bit to get this victory. As this is when, the two goons would look at Deku and say, no, you guys are going to turn around and you guys are going to throw your symbols at each other. And we're going to see what you guys throw, and we're going to determine who wins. So first, Deku would throw rock, with Bakugo throwing scissors, as he would win the first round, and Deku would then proceed to smile, thinking that, yeah, he's gonna definitely win this. As Bakugo would then proceed to beat Deku 2 times. As this is when we would have Deku proceed to throw paper, as Bakugo would throw rock, and they'd be tied 2-2. This next match is gonna decide everything. 3, 2, 1. They both throw rock, as they would say, who won? As they would say that you guys tied. As they would then throw another, and another, and another, as they would tie 4 times in a row. And this is when Deku would say, enough of this. He would then say, alright, this is the last time. As this is when Bakugo would be thinking the same. As Bakugo would be thinking of what Deku's going to throw. As this is when Bakugo would decide that he's going to be throwing rock, because he feels like Deku would throw scissors to basically block his paper, but instead, Deku actually ended up throwing, instead of throwing paper to pretty much throw him off guard, Bakugo would end up, throwing... Let's say he throws paper, and then instead, Deku ends up throwing rock. As they would then look at each other, and Deku would ask, so who won? As Bakugo would say, yeah, who won? As this is when they would say, Bakugo, I guess you're going to UA. As Bakugo would smile, and Deku would say, As he would say, so where am I going to go? As Bakugo would say, you could go to any other school, dude. I heard Shiketsu is going to be having a little bit of joint training with UA pretty soon. As Deku would say, Shiketsu, huh? Isn't that the number 2 rated school in Japan? As, Bakugo would say, and it's perfect for you, seeing as you're going to be the number 2 hero. As this is when Deku would say, yeah, that's rich, Bakugo. As Bakugo would look towards Deku and chuckle, as he would then say, well, I guess I'll see you then. As Deku and Bakugo would bump fists and say, I'll see you whenever we have to fight again. As Bakugo would say, I'll be ready then. as this is when Deku would smile and he would go off home, as this is when the 10 months of training would begin. And over the 10 months, Deku would practice basically how to turn himself and make himself look like other people to pretty much fool people and basically pull the mystique shtick, I guess you could say, as he would also learn 2 new abilities during this training. As during the 10 months, Deku would actually learn how to use his bones, kind of like Kinemaro, in the sense where he basically creates claws like Wolverine after getting the idea from reading the X-Men comics. As Deku would have decided that because of that, he's also going to try to see if he could stretch his body, kind of like Mr. Fantastic, as those universes mangas are actually there, incorporated into the My Hero Academia universe, so they can basically take inspiration from them. As Deku would proceed to read a lot of comic books and basically try to train and turn himself into those certain characters, as Deku would end up learning 2 new ways to use his quirk. See, during this entire time, Deku would have never actually had to train his body, seeing that he could just, tailor his body to whatever suits him at the certain time. As during the 10 months, Deku would pretty much just be training in hand-to-hand combat, increasing his skills and finesse in terms of how to fight people, and he would have ended up learning a fighting style that would have been very suited to him, the Kinemaro fighting style, as well as being able to stretch his body like Mr. Fantastic. Except it wouldn't quite be to the same extent, as that would be way too OP. Having a Deku who can do all that, he can stretch his body about, let's say, 30 feet. No. Let's go with 30 feet. He can stretch each and every one of his arms and legs to 30 feet, and he can basically shrink them and increase them in size, as that's essentially all Deku can do with his stretching ability, as well as dodging out of the way by stretching his body out of the way of attacks. And that's essentially how Deku would end up training for the 10 months. Now, seeing as there was really nobody there for All Might to give one for all to, Mirio would end up getting it in this version of events, seeing that, Deku would have never ended up grabbing onto his leg or even performing that act of heroism that he did in the original timeline. So everything with Mirio would pretty much go the same, and All Might would end up handing Mirio the quirk at about the 7-month mark, having Mirio train for about 7 months. Anyways, now, this is when we would proceed to have Deku over pretty much at the last day of his training, as Deku would wipe the sweat off his forehead, thinking that it's all came down to this, as he would think about Bakugo, wondering how strong he's gotten, as he would shoot Bakugo a text, and Bakugo would answer saying that he better be ready for these exams, as Deku would say, oh, he better believe he is, as this is when Deku would proceed to go to Shiketsu High's exams, as by this time Bakugo would have already gotten his acceptance letter and would have already been going to UA. But this is when Deku would proceed to essentially walk over to the the Shiketsu exams, as he would pretty much just be wearing some joggers. He would basically be wearing a black tank top, some black, some joggers, and some black, shoes. Basically wearing the future Trunks outfit, essentially, as that's what he would be pretty much rocking. As his hair, he would like to keep it short, and he has basically the perfect look, as he tailored his body specifically to how he fights. As Deku, he can increase his hair size, and he can pretty much do anything, so he's pretty much tailored to his perfect taste. As Deku would look like a way more attractive version of himself, basically, let's say 10 times. As Deku would proceed to essentially, hold on guys, I need to go blow my nose. It's bothering me so much. BRB. Now, this is when Deku would proceed to be looking at his phone, asking Bakugo if he got in, as Bakugo would tell him that he did, as Deku would be too distracted to notice that there's a girl walking in front of him, as Deku would actually end up bumping into her, and she would look at him and say, hey, what happened? As Deku would say, I'm so sorry about that, I didn't mean to bump into you. As the girl would turn around and say, oh, no, you're totally good. As this is when Deku would proceed to ask her, what her name is and what her quirk is and why she wants to become a hero. As he and her would have a little conversation outside, as there's still 30 minutes for them to go inside. As this is when Deku would end up getting into a conversation with Cammy, as they would proceed to talk for a bit, and this is when Deku would ask for Cammy's number, as Cammy would gladly accept, telling Deku that of course she'll give it to him, as she would say that, maybe after this exam they could hang out or something, as this is when Deku would say, yeah, maybe we might. As this is when they would now, go inside and take the written portion of the exam. As Deku would end up passing with flying colors, getting about a 90% on the exam. Seeing as Deku is very intelligent in this version, on top of the fact that, he's also strong. So Deku would end up, getting a really good score and impressing the teachers there. as this is when the real exam is shown to them, as the first portion of the exam is actually going to be a capture the flag, where essentially they're going to be having to be grouped up into teams to assess every single one of the students' teamworks, as this is when everybody's pretty much just chilling there, as they would have just pretty much just been doing what you would expect. They'd be doing their capture the flag stuff, as Deku would be on a different team from anybody. He wouldn't have nobody that's going to be in his future class in there, as Deku would be showing remarkable talent in there, as he would, shape his appearance to look like someone on the other team, as he would run in there and capture a bunch of the flags from the opposing teams, as his team would end up winning, and that's essentially how that capture the flag, little trial would go. And this one they would have another thing happen, as in that portion they didn't really have to fight against their teammates. They kind of just had to defend. And if they got caught, they pretty much had to go back. As this is when they would now actually, as that exercise, as I had already stated, would have pretty much just been testing their teamwork. As this is when we would now have the real exam, the hard portion, where they're actually going to be having to fight upperclassmen. Kind of like when Mirio ended up fighting, the students of UA. As the upperclassmen would pretty much be told to hold back a bit. As this is when everybody from the original canon would pretty much end up passing from, the Shiketsu side of things, as this is when we would now actually have a couple of different things happening. Now, this is when Deku would actually be pit up against a kid with an electricity quirk, as the thing would essentially start as a kid would pretty much blast electricity straight at Deku, as Deku would, stretch himself out in one certain direction, as the kid is like caught off guard thinking that he has a stretching quirk. I thought he could shapeshift. As this is when Deku would rush towards him, taking bones out of his body, because he would say, "What? He has multiple quirks?" As this is when Deku would pretty much just keep rushing at him, as the student would pretty much just look at Deku and just smile, thinking that, yeah, he's definitely going to be doing great things here. As they would get into a pretty good fight, as by the end of things, Deku would end up sweeping the upperclassman's leg, knocking him to the ground, and he would then hit him with one last final punch, knocking the student out. As Deku would be declared the winner, and he would then be told that he needs to go home, as the teachers would basically tell him that he's most likely going to get in. As Deku would smile towards them, and he would then proceed to look at, everybody. As this is when he would walk out and basically just be waiting for the girl that he had met at the beginning. As Cammy would walk outside telling him if he thinks he passed, as he would say that most likely he did, as the people told him that he most likely did. As Cammy would say that's awesome. As they'd proceed to pretty much just walk around and hang out for a bit, about an hour or so. As they would walk around town and go get a bite to eat, as Deku and Cammy would get to know each other a little bit. And this is when Cammy would ask Deku what his quirk exactly is, as he never ended up telling her his, as Deku would say that his quirk is white blood cell manipulation, as he can pretty much change any part of his body to suit what he wants to be. And she would say, "Really?" And she would say, "Is that really what you even look like then?" As Deku would say, "Oh, yeah, I just basically changed my body to make myself more muscular without having to, do the thing myself." As she would say, "Huh, isn't that kind of cheating?" As Deku would say, "Not really, I mean, it's my quirk." As she would say, "Yeah, I guess." As this is when, Deku would proceed to look towards Cammy, and they would pretty much just have their day off, as Cammy would pretty much just be texting back and forth with Deku over the next couple of days before they get their entrance letter. As they would all, every member of Shiketsu High would be told that they're definitely going to be getting in, and this is when they would all pretty much arrive for the first day of school. As soon as they arrive, they would actually be told that they're going to be having a quirk assessment before they actually start things off. As what they're first going to be doing, the first order of business is actually going to be fighting the teacher. As every single member of Shiketsu would look at each other, as they would pretty much get to know each other and talk for a bit, for about an hour. As the teacher would tell them that this is going to be better for them, as they're all actually going to be fighting him one-on-one, and they need to see who does the best and basically test their skills for now. As he would go around asking them what their quirks are, and the teacher would get prepared accordingly to what their powers are going to be. As this is when Deku and Cammy would be talking in the back about how they're going to handle this situation, and she would say she doesn't know if he could do that great in a battle situation. As Deku would say, "Why not?" And she would say, "Well, my quirk is illusions after all." As Deku would say, "Oh, that is true." As this is when we would now pretty much have the fights between the teachers, as Inasa would actually be the first to go in, as he ended up getting in through recommendation, and he would end up doing pretty great against the teacher, but the teacher would have ended up, ultimately taking him down. As whoever the teacher is doesn't really matter too much in terms of Shiketsu, as let's just say that Gang Orca. Gang Orca is the school teacher, as he would have ended up using his sonic waves to blast at Inasa, sending him flying out of the ring. As Deku would, decide that he's gonna try to basically grow to Gang Orca's size, as he would grow to the same amount of mass as Gang Orca, as he would have his bones pop out of every portion of his body, as he would say, "I'm ready," as he would rush towards him, and he would begin to start slashing at Gang Orca, as Gang would proceed to block every single one of his attacks, and would then punch Deku right in the gut, sending him flying back, as he would then rush towards him and send a sonic attack straight at Deku's face, as he holds his skull and, blasts him right in the face, as Deku would get knocked out. And this is when everybody else would pretty much have to go in, as Deku would wake up about 5 minutes later saying that, wow, this guy is definitely strong. As this is when he would proceed to smile and tell all the class where they basically messed up and where they're going to be working on for the first year. As he would tell them all of their flaws and what they need to work on, as everybody in Shiketsu would pretty much just look towards him and understand and say, right. As this is when he would proceed to tell them all that the first order of business is going to be just normal studying, and then they're going to be having their normal hero stuff. As they would all understand and would say that they're ready for anything. As this is when the class would begin to know each other a little bit more. As who I'm going to be referring to as Meatball Boy would actually walk up to Deku and tell him that he actually did really well against him. As Deku would ask him what his quirk is. As it seems so unorthodox. As he would proceed to look towards Deku and tell him that, it's just, I can pretty much turn anything and everything that my quirk touches into a meatball substance. As it pretty much ends up rendering them useless, and I can reverse the effects whenever I want. As Deku would say that that's a very useful quirk. As Inasa would walk up to him and say, "Hello, my name is Inasa." I don't know his last name. As he would smash his head into the concrete. As Deku would say, "Whoa there, buddy. Are you okay?" As he would say, "I'm fine. What do you ask?" As Deku would say, "Dude, you need to chill out." As Inasa would just start laughing, and everybody there would pretty much just get acquainted with each other. As we would have the guy with the long hair basically walk up to Deku, as he would say, "I see your quirk's very useful. Can you mimic my quirk?" As Deku would try to pretty much stretch his hair out, but due to the fact that that's not his quirk, he wouldn't be able to pretty much use it in the same way as the guy can. As he would say, "Good. I guess I'm still useful here after all." As Deku would just start laughing, as everybody there would begin to pretty much just talk amongst themselves and get to know each other a little bit more, as they decide that maybe they're going to go to the arcade to hang out for a bit, as that's essentially what they're going to be doing for a while, as they would pretty much just go out to an arcade and go hang out with each other, deciding and pretty much just seeing how everybody acts with each other. As this is when we would now have a couple of Kami interactions happening with, Deku and Kami just flirting a bit. And Inasa would actually get to know Deku, taking a bit of a liking towards him and explaining to Deku why he's here instead of UA. As Deku would actually understand Inasa's point of view and say that, wow, that Todoroki kid must have been a real jerk if he was pretty much came here just because of that. As he would say, yeah, everybody there just seems like they're kind of stuck up and feels like they're better than everybody. As Deku would say that not everybody's like that. As he would then be thinking about Bakugo. And this is when they would say, what do you mean by that? As Deku would begin to talk to them and explain to them who he's talking about. This being Kachan or Katsuki Bakugo. As they would all say, oh, that kid. As they would say, yeah, I heard that he got first place in the UA entrance exams. As Deku would say, really, he did? As they would say, yeah, he did pretty marvelous in there. Ended up getting about 100 points. As Deku would say, what? As he would just pretty much text Bakugo and say, you got first place? As Bakugo would answer back pretty much later at night, telling him he sure did. As Deku would decide that he has to step his game up if he wants to keep up with him. As this is when we would actually have a couple of different events happening. They would proceed to do normal school stuff for about a week or two, as they would proceed to have just some normal events happening. As, they wouldn't really have too much to pretty much go over, as there wouldn't really be no heroes versus villain stuff, and they would proceed to pretty much just do team exercises to pretty much hone in on their ability to work with other pro heroes, is what they're first focusing on, since that's what most of them actually are lacking. As if they would have actually worked together, in that he's almost certain that if this class can work together, they will definitely be a force to be reckoned with. They're going to be one of the top 10 heroes, certainly, if they can get their stuff straight. As this is when we would now have a couple of other stuff happening. Now, this is when about a week in, Deku and Kami would be hanging out, and she would ask him if, she could come over. As Deku would say, of course she can. As Deku would ask, knock on the doors, he would open with his keys and say, Mom, are you home? As they're be no answer. No answer. No answer. As he would say, well, looks like we have it all to ourselves. As Cammy would say, that's perfect. As she would say, well, why don't we have some fun? As Deku would say, what kind of fun? As Cammy would proceed to tell him that in his ear, as she would whisper that she says she wants to hit the books. As Deku would say, oh, you want to study? As, Cammy would say, yeah, that's exactly what I want to do. As Deku would say, all right, so what are we going to do first? Math, science, or history? As Cammy would say, how about all three? As they would proceed to start studying like crazy. Deku would start hitting the books. He would start going crazy and ham. As Cammy would proceed to essentially just be having a blast. As she would pretty much start screaming, telling Deku that, oh, he's doing it perfectly. As, Deku would proceed to be smiling, thinking that, yeah, he's pretty good at math. He's pretty good at science. As Cammy and Deku would proceed to have a pretty good time. As this is when Inko would arrive home, and Cammy would be nowhere to be seen. As she would have made her escape right after all that was done. As, she would ask Deku if he wants something to eat. As he would say, yeah, Mom, of course. As she'd, she'd whip up something real quick for him and ask, where's Bakugo? How's he doing? As Deku would say, oh, Bakugo, I haven't really seen him in person for a while now. We're going to meet whenever the time comes, and I'm hoping I'm ready for that. She would say, what do you mean? As she would say that she would explain the situation with Bakugo and himself to his mom, as she would say, wow, I guess you guys are now going to start to be rivals other than best friends. As he would say, yeah, but we've always kind of been like that, Mom. You know it too. As she'd say, yeah, good old times. As this is when they would report back to school, as on this day, Gang Orca would proceed to tell them that they're actually going to be having a couple of changes around here. As they would say, what do you mean? As he would say that this is going to be the first time that they're going to be having a joint training with another school. As they would ask what they're going to be doing, and Deku would end up knowing exactly what's going on. As he would say that they're going to go to UA, aren't they? As they would say, yeah, they accepted our request to basically do some joint training, and that's where we're going. As all of the students in Shiketsu would hop on the bus, with all of the irrelevant ones also going on. As I'm only really going to be focusing on the main five, that being Deku, Hair Guy. A lot of you guys are probably salty, like, yo, how do you not know these people's names? As the weather, the weather, weather's nice today, isn't it? As we would proceed to have Deku and everybody just talking on the bus, getting to know each other more, as they'd begin to pretty much just get along amongst themselves, and Deku would proceed to essentially just be chilling with Cammy in the back, as well as Inasa. As Inasa would have basically became one of Deku's closest friends in the entirety of Shiketsu. As Deku would ask Inasa, what does he think they're going to be doing? As he would say he hopes they're going to be doing some, combat practice with them to see how they scale. As he says that he hopes he hopes he doesn't have to, be friends with that Todoroki kid over there. As Deku would say, oh, right, about that guy. As this is when we would now have them arrive at the USJ, as they'd pretty much just bow down to each other and say, hello, our names are, and pretty much just tell each other their quirks. As they'd proceed to get to know each other, and Bakugo and Deku would basically walk up to each other, as they would pretty much just do a little bit of a fist bump, as they'd say, so, how strong have you gotten? As Bakugo would say, you better be ready to find out in case they make us fight each other. As Deku would say, I wouldn't have it any other way. And they'd proceed to pretty much just be told by 13 her little speech. As this is when Kurogira would appear and teleport Deku and Bakugo as well as Cammy to the same location, as they would pretty much be taken to the location that Bakugo was taken, and Kirishima and them would not be taken anywhere, as everybody would be teleported to different places, and Todoroki and would be teleported to the water places. He would take out all of those villains, just pretty much freezing the water, and he would save Suyu and Mineta, with Inasa pretty much being teleported to the place where Electric Boy would have been taken, and he would have ended up rescuing Momo and Jiro, as that entire situation would be going smoothly. Now, in terms of Deku and Bakugo, they would be going crazy, taking out villains left and right, as they would clean their area in about 1 minute, as they would then rush out to see Aizawa, helping take down a couple of villains. As they would rush on in there, as they would say, you need help? As Aizawa would say, no, get out of here. You guys need to go upstairs and go call for help. As they would say, no way in hell we're doing that. As they would proceed to get back to back with Aizawa, as they would say, we're ready for this. As Aizawa would just say, I can't deal with this right now, so you guys better be safe. as this is when Gang Orca would step in and he would proceed to basically step up to the Nomu, as he would begin to fight the Nomu, but it would be shown very fast that he's not going to be a challenge to the Nomu, as the Nomu would begin to overpower Gang Orca, as you would see that he's starting to basically pretty much lose some ground, as this is when Deku and Bakugo would proceed to help take down every single one of the other villains, as by this point All Might would have arrived, as he would have jumped in and Gang Orca and All Might would proceed to basically tag team the Nomu, as at this point we would have Bakugo and Deku basically doing the same to Shigaraki and Kurogiri. Deku would proceed to be fighting against Shigaraki using his bone quirk to hit Shigaraki and hit him in places that Shigaraki will get wounded at, as Deku would sweep Shigaraki by the leg and he would then elbow him right in the throat, as he would say, since you like to scratch so much, how about I hit you there? As he would, go down on him in a sort of, you can't see me fashion, as, you just have Deku fall down on Shigaraki's neck. Shigaraki would scream, and this is when they would pretty much be taken down, as Kurogiri would have actually been taken out by Bakugo, as he would have launched a full power howitzer impact straight at Kurogiri's metal piece, as Kurogiri would have been taken out of the picture. As this is when we would now have a couple of things changing, as the USJ situation would have actually gone by a lot more smoother than it did in canon, and now Deku would have actually seen how much more Bakugo would have improved, as Deku would have had the easier of the foes to pretty much take down, and Deku would decide that he's definitely going to have to step up his game if he wants to keep up with Bakugo. As in terms of the 1 week break that they're going to be having, Deku would stay away from everybody in Shiketsu and pretty much just train in his normal location, a warehouse, as Deku would basically do a lot of combat exercises and trying to catch up to Bakugo's normal tenacity and ability to pretty much fight as basically a super soldier. As Deku would end up wrapping up his training, and this is when they would now be announced that they're actually going to be having they're actually going to be sending 5 of their students over to the UA Sports Festival. As this is when, Deku would actually be told that he's definitely going to be one of them. As this is when the Gang Orca would proceed to announce that the people who are going to be going to UA to show off their school is going to be Deku, Kami, Inasa, Senji, and Naganasamura, basically the guy with the hair. As if you guys are wondering how I ended up learning their names, it's in my script. Probably should have wrote that earlier on. Now, this is when they would pretty much arrive, and Bakugo would end up giving the same speech as in canon. Even though he's a lot less, arrogant than he is in the original, and not as, as mean as he is, he would still end up telling everybody that he's gonna win. He would keep it short, sweet, and simple. As this is when we would now have the race, which is actually not exactly going to go towards Deku's favor, and a lot of things are actually going to start changing from here on out. As soon as the race starts, we would have Bakugo and Inasa being the ones who are pretty much rivaling and fighting each other over the first place, as they would basically be the 2 people who are in first place, fighting for that place. As we would then have Todoroki next, who's basically fighting for the 3rd place, as he can't quite catch up to Inasa and Bakugo, seeing that Bakugo and Inasa are way faster than him just in normal speed. As this is when Deku would actually be running with nothing but his pure speed and, his tenacity, as he's basically catching up in 4th place, running fast, barely being behind Todoroki, but, still not being able to catch up to Bakugo and Inasa, as that's pretty much their forte, their speed. Bakugo's based on the speed and strength, as, Bakugo's speed would have definitely been enhanced by his stronger explosions that he now has. As this is when we would now have the results of the rest of the thing pretty much being irrelevant. I'd say Ida gets, let's just go with he gets 5th place, and everybody else's placement doesn't really matter too much. Just know that everybody in the Shiketsu ends up passing, and that's essentially how the race would go. Now, in terms of the Cavalry Battle, I could definitely see a lot of, interesting developments happening. As here, we're actually going to have a lot of things happening. The team would end up consisting of Nomura, or the hair guy, pretty much, Senji, sorry for that, Deku and Kami being on the same team. As in this event, Kami's usefulness is actually going to go up way off the charts, as this is an idea that one weeb actually ended up giving to me. As me and him were pretty much discussing this what if, and he ended up suggesting me this incredible idea, which is pretty much to have Kami use her illusion quirk to make it seem like the headbands are on Deku's neck, as in reality they're on his shoulder, as nobody would really know what's going on, but Deku would pretty much have them on his arm, and everybody would see an illusion that Deku has them on his, his shoulder. As during this time, Deku would have told his team that instead of basically going after Bakugo, as he ended up getting first place, they should go after the smaller targets to basically save up their stamina and not really draw too much attention to themselves now. They should save their energy for the last event, playing it smart, as Cammy would use her illusions to pretty much make other people think that they took and stole their headbands effectively. As the guy with the basically hair, he would use his, his subtle quirk to pretty much just steal other people's headbands from under their noses. 1 or 2 headbands from every team, as they would have ended up racking up a bunch of points, gaining them up to the 2nd place. As this is when we would now have, a couple of other things happening. Bakugo and Todoroki would be the 2 people who are pretty much fighting over the headbands, as by the end of it, we would now have 20 seconds left in the battle, as Deku's team would actually rush straight towards them, as Deku would end up stretching his arm out and yanking the headband from Bakugo's, throat, as Bakugo would have actually had that, headband taken away, as Bakugo would have been left with, not a lot of other options, as Bakugo would have ended up looking towards Tsuyu and told her to steal Deku's headbands that he has on his arm, as this is when he would realize that Deku would have definitely had that scheme, as Tsuyu would have ended up taking that headband, and Deku's team would have ended up getting out with the 10 million points, as we would now have Deku's team being in first, Bakugo second, Todoroki third, and the rest of the people who were involved in the battles pretty much passing just like you would expect them to. Now, this is when we're now actually going to get into the fights. The fights are going to be a lot more different than you would expect them to be, and they've got a lot different than they did in canon. See, in this version, we're actually going to be having Todoroki fight Inasa for his first battle, as that's going to go by very differently. See, with Todoroki's pretty much fire and Inasa's wind quirk, they would pretty much cancel each other out, and with Todoroki basically not being able to bring himself to use his fire side, they would end up eliminating each other, with both of them pretty much not choosing to back down, as Todoroki and Inasa would be eliminated and thrown out of the ring by each other. And this is when we would now actually have Bakugo fighting the guy from Shiketsu who can basically use the hair quirk, as Bakugo would have ended up burning it, and he would have ended up prompting to choose to pretty much eliminate himself, as he would walk off the stage realizing that this battle is pretty much in vain, and if he continues, he's just going to harm himself. As this is when we would now actually have the different battle happening, which is essentially going to be Uraraka versus Cammy, as Uraraka would basically think that she has a chance, but instead Cammy would end up beating Uraraka, seeing that she actually knows how to fight in hand-to-hand combat, as that's one of the things that she would have also trained. Seeing as all she has illusions, she would have gotten ahead of the curve and would have actually decided that it would have been a lot smarter for her to pretty much use her her fighting capabilities to pretty much get ahead of the curve of everybody else, and she would have ended up overwhelming Uraraka in terms of that regard. And this is when we would essentially have the Deku versus Shinso fight, except this time Deku doesn't really have that different nature of him, and since he's Bakugo's friend, he definitely would be used to insults. So when Shinso tries to get Deku to pretty much just speak to him by insulting him, Deku would have just rushed straight at Shinso, and he would have ended up taking Shinso out as swiftly as possible. As this is when we would now have the second battles happening, which essentially, since Todoroki and Inasa are not around, Deku wouldn't really have too much of an issue taking anybody out. On the second round, Deku has to fight Kirishima, and he would end up winning that battle relatively easy, as he would have ended up using his stretching ability to pretty much grab Kirishima by the leg and fling him out of the arena and get the victory over him. As then we would have Bakugo fighting Shinji, I don't know, the guy with the meatball quirk, and Bakugo would end up barely dodging his attack, as he would end up shooting a big explosion at him to basically throw him out of the arena. And this is when we would now actually go on to the final battles, as the rest of them aren't really too important. All the main members have pretty much been eliminated, and let's just say that Electric Boy would have basically had to take on Cammy, and he would have ended up beating her, and everybody else would have pretty much just been taken out by each other. And this is when we're now actually going to basically skip on over to the battle that we've all been waiting for, Bakugo versus Deku. At this point, the score has been Deku 51, Bakugo 50, as that's their score for battles that they've won and lost so far. As this is when we would now actually have them both step into the arena, as they would look towards each other and give each other a smirk, as they would say, well, I guess it's time to see who's trained harder. As Deku would say, yeah, I guess it is. As he would then look towards Bakugo and smile, as Bakugo would look towards him and give him a bit of a grin as well. As, Bakugo would look straight at Deku and say, you ready? As Deku would say, as he would pop the bones out and say, as ready as I'll ever be. As they would then rush towards each other and the clash would begin. Bakugo would start the battle by rushing at Deku and beginning to throw a flurry of punches and explosions at Deku. As Deku would use his elastic nature to pretty much just bend and, dodge all of, Bakugo's attacks. As he would end up shifting his bones and organs to different directions, as, Inosuke would do. As, similar to my Tsukasa Deku, he'd end up dodging a bunch of Bakugo's attacks. And this is when Bakugo would decide that getting into a close hand-to-hand battle would not exactly be the best thing for him. As Bakugo would decide that he should go into the air and shoot a bunch of AP blasts at Deku. As he would do just that, and Deku would proceed to just basically dodge out of the way and use his bones to pretty much shoot them straight at Bakugo who's in the air, as well as using his stretching ability to try to reach and grab at Bakugo to basically pull him down. As Bakugo would decide that this is useless, at this point it's going to be a stamina battle, and he doesn't know how much of that Deku has. As he would rush back into Deku, shooting a howitzer impact straight towards his direction. As Deku would basically turn himself into, bones, he would harden his bone density a lot more, as he would then stand there with both of his arms in front of Bakugo's attacks, as Bakugo's attack would land and end up heavily injuring Deku, as Deku would be extremely hurt from that attack. And this is when Deku would decide that it's all or nothing now, as all of his bones would basically pop out, and he would then proceed to basically attack at Bakugo, landing a flurry of attacks in a sort of Wolverine fashion, as he would hit ballistic attacks straight at Bakugo's direction, as Bakugo would be caught off guard by a couple of the attacks, as Bakugo would end up, jumping right as Deku was about to land a sweeping attack, and Bakugo would hit Deku right in the head, basically having Deku, basically get stunned, as Deku would see what's going on, and he would basically try to, dodge Bakugo's next attack, as Bakugo would land a very, strong explosion point blank at Deku's chest, sending him flying almost out of the arena. But before Deku can fall, Deku would have, his stretching ability grab onto the piece of the arena and flip him off of there. And this is when he would rush towards Bakugo, who pretty much was on the edge of the arena, as he would throw a strong blow straight at Bakugo's direction, as Bakugo would tank the attack and his head would be thrown back as his body would begin to throw himself out of the arena, as this is when Bakugo would then shift the attack and shift his body in a sort of Garo fashion, as he would then hit him back with an attack that pretty much resembles the Water Stream Rock Smashing Fist, as he would have Deku fly out of the arena from the opposing side, and Deku would be flung out, as Deku would have ended up losing that battle. As Bakugo would then fall to his knees, he would be breathing hard and he would hold his hand up in the sky, as he would have done exactly what he would have promised and won the sports festival. As everybody would have basically just been seeing that amazing battle, and they would just start cheering, as had it not been basically a tournament battle, who knows how this would have ended, as Deku would have actually been able to pick himself up and still had more energy than Bakugo. So who knows how this battle would have gone if it wasn't for the stakes that we're on right now. As Bakugo would pretty much just walk up to Deku and he would pretty much just tell him that was a pretty good fight, but I guess the score is evened out now. As Bakugo would proceed to chuckle at Deku, as Deku would say, I'll get you next time though, don't worry about it, don't get too ahead of yourself, I'll catch up to you, Bakugo. As he would say, well, you better train harder than me, and considering how hard I've been training, I don't think that's even humanly possible. As we would now flash back to Bakugo's training, who during this entire time would have been training himself harder than he would have ever imagined himself to. As at this point, Bakugo's explosions would be 2 times stronger than in canon. His physical tenacity and his will would have been increased by tenfold, seeing that he had somebody and a goal to pretty much pursue, as he would basically have the same abilities and attacks that he does in the season, let's say season 5 of the manga, as Bakugo would definitely be a well-rounded, attacker and well-based speed, brawler, as this is when Deku would pretty much just pick himself up and they would pretty much be handed their medals, as Deku would be handed 2nd place, and in 3rd place we would actually have a very funny thing happening, as in 3rd place we would actually have Cammy, who would have ended up getting in her 3rd place, and she would have ended up losing to Bakugo in one of the semifinals matches, as Deku would have ended up beating, let's say, Tape Boy. He would have ended up beating Tape Boy and would have ended up progressing to the finals. And that's pretty much what ended up happening in terms of the sports festival stuff, as nothing really changes too much from here on out, as now we're actually going to be going back to the school, as Gang Orca would proceed to talk to them about how they did in the sports festival, and he would congratulate Deku for that amazing fight that he had with Bakugo, telling him that Bakugo just had that little, he got lucky, I guess you could say, as Deku would say, no, he earned that win fair and square. Sorry, I had to drink some water. As this is when Gang Orca would proceed to tell them all where they need to train on and what they need to focus on even more, hammering it into their thick skulls once again, as they would all understand what he's trying to tell them. And this is when they would proceed to pretty much be told that, well, now that that's over, we need to get down to business. Hero names and internships. As they would say, what? We're going to have internships? As he would say, yes. And you guys are going to be having to pick where you guys are all going to be going to. As this is when they would pretty much get their list of, of offers for internships. And in terms of everybody else, that really wouldn't matter. But before we actually cut on over to what happens during the internships, I'm actually going to be covering what happens in the Hosu City. See, since Shigaraki and Kurogiri were never there, we would not actually have the Nomus attack Hosu City, and seeing as that never happened, we would actually not have nobody ever actually noticing, Ida there. And since Bakugo would have ended up still going to Best Jeanist, as Best Jeanist still saw that little nature that he had in, that he had in the original, he would have still ended up going with Best Jeanist, except this time he would have actually ended up doing some training with him. And Jeanist would have actually taught him a couple of things, not only in terms of how to become a better person, but how to become a stronger hero and how to train his quirk even more efficiently and effectively. As this is essentially how Bakugo's training would go with Best Jeanist, a lot better than it did in canon, as you can all tell. And this is when Deku would end up looking at his sheet, as he would then see that, his sheet doesn't really have too much to offer him. As he would then see the hero Edge Shot, as he would say, I have to go there. As they would then ask him what his hero name's going to be. As Deku would begin to think about this and wonder to himself, what should he name himself? As this is when he would cut on over to a flashback, as he would remember the hero from the X-Men comics, as he would think, Mystique. As he would then look towards them all and say, my hero name is going to be the shape-shifting hero Mystique. As they would all ask him if he's sure about it, and Deku would say he's positive. As that's essentially what Deku's hero name is going to be. And this is when we would now actually, cut on over to Deku's training that he's going to be having with Edgeshot, as he would go to Edgeshot's agency, and this is where Deku would proceed to basically learn a lot, as he would basically learn mostly about how to be a pro hero, how to patrol, how to run an agency, and he would also have a bit of sparring with Edgeshot, which Edgeshot would actually end up beating Deku a lot, and he would actually end up doing a lot of, fighting with Edgeshot, and he would have actually ended up picking up a couple of things from Edgeshot. He would have ended up picking up a mimicry version of it, where he basically tries to copy Edgeshot's, his quirk's movements. As Deku would see that Edgeshot's quirk is extremely versatile. His quirk is so good for, capturing villains swiftly. As Deku would have ended up using his body to pretty much create a mimicry version of it that's way less potent and, doesn't exactly do what Edgeshot's version does, but it's very swift and it's a very, quick version of it that's, not as powerful as I already said, but that's essentially what Deku would have ended up learning. He would have also picked up some of Edgeshot's fighting styles and his stance, and Deku would have ended up revolving his fighting style around Edgeshot. As this is when we would now cover Ida dying because, well, Bakugo ends up going with Best Jeanist, and instead of wasting his time again, he ends up learning something. And since he's still hot-headed, he still ends up going there. Now, This is when we would now have all of the students return back to class. As on the UA side, they would actually have the news happening that Ida ended up dying in the, Hosu City due to the hero killer Stain. And, they would have been informed to them that Ida would have been trying to get revenge. As they would all wish that things would have been different. But seeing that Deku wasn't even there to pretty much tell him that he's there for them, Ida would have ran in there with even more rage in his heart, as Stain would have deemed him an unworthy hero, as he would have cut down that worthless, mimicry of a hero, as he would have taken down Ida and told him that he's not worthy or fit to take on the mantle of any hero at all. As that's where we're going to be ending off this amazing story, guys. If you guys want part 2, definitely let me know what you guys thought about the video, and leave a like, as well as subscribe to the channel, as only 50% of you guys, or no, 40% of you guys are actually subscribed. And, with that being said, you guys are going to be getting part 2 very soon, so definitely be on the lookout for that. And with that being said, guys, you guys all know the drill. It has been your boy Zether, and as always, I had a great time making this video, but as you all know, I'm out. Peace.